What is the connection between hypocrisy and politics? Can politics be done without hypocrisy? Or is hypocrisy indefeasible or inalienable to the practice of politics? This question has been raised with me by someone for whom I have great respect, someone whose writings are a source of inspiration, information, and much personal enrichment, whose recent book I read with much delight. Let me introduce that book very briefly to you. The author is Mr. M.A. Umman. M.A. Umman. The book is in Malayalam. I hope it would be translated into English, made available to a wider readership. And the title of the book is M.A. Ummante Thiranjedutha Lekhanangal, the selected articles of M.A. Umman. M.A. Umman is a widely respected thinker, academic, researcher, who continues to be actively engaged with the issues concerning the people, not merely of the economics variety, but also the larger assortment of issues, which also is his strength. Though a very strong, sturdy, sound academic in economics, he is also a stimulating thinker with a wider repertoire of concerns and intellectual resources. I commend this book, M.A. Ummante Thiranjedutha Lekhanangal, the selected articles of M.A. Umman, to all those who can read Malayalam. At the moment, the book is available only in that language. And as I said a short while ago, I hope it would be translated and made available to others as well. M.A. Umman, of course, was deeply influenced by Amartya Sen, and that influence can be seen very prominently and unmistakably throughout all that is included in this volume. And when I was reading this book, my memory went back to the series of lectures that Amartya Sen delivered under the auspices of Delhi School of Economics some 40 years ago. And he opened his three lecture series with a story. The story was that a man was flying by a balloon, hot air balloon, but he drifted, he lost his track, he drifted, and he came to a place that seemed altogether unfamiliar to him. But when the balloon came low enough for him to be able to ask someone and find out where he was, he spotted somebody and he shouted from atop, from the balloon, what is this place? Can you tell me what is this place? So the man said, no, he asked, can you tell me where I am? The man said, well, you are on a balloon. So upon which the man who was traveling by the balloon, he said, are you an economist? He said, why do you ask me? I'm an economist, how do you know? He said, well, economists have the skill to say what is the most useless thing in any given context. So that is Amartya Sen's story, heard many years ago. I've always listened to Amartya Sen whenever he came to Delhi. I've also read a little bit of his works, particularly Economic Development and Social Opportunities, which is a book co-authored with Jean Drèze, another person whom I happen to know personally. So these are all wonderful gifts to people with tremendous resources. They're also great human beings. And you can't have great ideas coming from third-rate specimens of humanity. So now let me take leave of M.A. Umman's book and stay completely focused with even though it's in a rushed manner, with the request that he has made. Would I say something about the relationship between politics and hypocrisy? Well, everybody today assumes, on very good grounds, that hypocrisy is unavoidable in the practice of politics. In other words, even though theoretically people say that there must be a strong and meaningful relationship between ethics and politics, as in the case of principled politics, which Gandhi advocated, which actually means in practical terms that the practice of politics must be guided by the light of truth. In practice, it's the other way around. It's not truth but falsehood that's ruling the roost as far as the practice of politics is concerned. So let's be open enough, let's be frank enough, let's be honest enough to admit that while we all long for principled politics, what we endorse and what we appreciate being practiced is politics of hypocrisy. At the same time, everyone wants good governance, but we will vote crooks and criminals to power, as has been revealed through the many statistics relevant to this issue presented in the Parliament of India. And also it's available in the public domain, that a sizable proportion of those who receive party tickets and those who are successful candidates are all with very hardcore criminal records, and they are elected by the people and freely elected by the people, so much so it has come to be deemed axiomatic that only a person with some kind of criminal streak will make the voters feel that he has a certain degree of charisma, which then motivates them to vote for candidates like that. So this is a reality, and it's good to recognize it. So let's start with the honest recognition that hypocrisy plays a big role in the practice of politics. Second thing is, what is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy, the simplest definition of hypocrisy that I can think of is, see, hypocrisy is the gulf between what is said and what is done. Hypocrisy is the gulf or the contradiction between what is said and what is done. For example, a party or a government may profess or even proclaim commitment to the poor. If you ask these politicians what's their life's mission, they would say it is just to serve the poor, or to be vigilant custodians of national wealth so that there is no corruption practiced anywhere. Na khaunga, na khane dunga. India will be a zone of zero tolerance for corruption. But in actual practice, you can expect something else. I don't have to deal with this contradiction in detail. Everyone is familiar with this. So that is the source of hypocrisy, the contradiction between what is said and what is done. The second thing I want to say is, the third thing I want to say is that there are two aspects to hypocrisy. And you will be shocked that I say this, especially because I happen to have the hat of a religious functionary as well. There is something worse than hypocrisy, and that is brutal truth. For example, when a politician pays lip service to the poor, he is practicing hypocrisy. There's no doubt about it. In public hearing, he will pay lip service to the poor, but behind the scene, he'll support the richest in the society, including crony capitalists, etc. But that is not as bad as proclaiming publicly that we believe that the poor are a nuisance to India and we will support only the capitalists. That's the truth. That is the truth. But making a statement like that is not or it does not show a greater degree of ethical refinement as compared to the hypocrisy of paying lip service to the poor and actually serving the interest of the economic and ruling elite, or the alliance between the economic and political elite in this country. So, therefore, I would now say that hypocrisy is the tribute that wickedness pays to virtue. Hypocrisy is the tribute that corruption pays to integrity, dishonesty pays to honesty, wickedness pays to correct or ethical behavior. So, to the extent that this tribute is being paid in public, the people are at least kept reminded of the fact that these supposedly old world virtues like honesty, truth, justice, compassion, commitment to the poor, caring culture, etc., have still some validity. Suppose you take the stand that all these are outdated ideals or virtues, they're no longer relevant. We will now only state the truth. The truth is that it will be better for the country if the burden of having to look after millions and millions, crores and crores of poor are either expelled from the country or exterminated from the country. If that is, and I suppose a statement like that is made, which is better? I would any day welcome the hypocrisy of saying that the government stands for the poor. All political parties stand for the poor. Of course, you would counter my argument by saying that for the last 75 years, political parties have been proclaiming total solidarity with the poor, but the poor are becoming poorer and the rich becoming richer. Yes, that is true. But at least in theory, the recognition still exists that the poor also matter. Whereas if you tell the blunt truth which is actually being practiced, then the only gain is that even that little bit of theoretical recognition of the relevance and the value of the poor people who constitute the majority in this country will be blotted out. That's why I say that sometimes hypocrisy is better than truth in the practice of politics. However, hypocrisy doesn't help anyone. Well, maybe I'll come back to this as we proceed. The third thing I want to say is the source of hypocrisy is not politics. The origin, the wellspring of hypocrisy is not politics, it is religion. As a matter of fact, my confirmed conviction is that religion is the nursery of all the wrong things that you can think of. For example, but for religion there would be no communalization of politics and the atrocities that go with it. But for religion there would not have been a spirit of intolerance. Anyone who knows anything about the history of religions will immediately agree with me that it is religion or religions that promoted this culture of mutual intolerance. For example, when Modi proclaimed that his aim was to create Congress Mukt Bharat, he actually reminded me of the agenda proclaimed by Christians globally, a bandwagon to which many Indian Christians also jumped on too. That our aim must be to gain the globe for Christ by 2000, which meant that all other religions must be blotted out. But when Christians heard that statement or that goal posited by what's called the infamous Joshua Project, they were all very greatly excited. And I have to confess that I also attended 2 or 3 national and international seminars. The more I heard what was being said, the more I realized that the people who were dominating the scene were actually enemies of Christianity. At least they knew nothing about Christianity. Christianity is not an imperialistic religion. It doesn't seek the blotting out of any other religion. It respects everybody's right to exist, everybody's freedom of thought, everybody's freedom of choice. There's no doubt about it. So, to erect an imperialistic pseudo-religion on the foundations of Jesus Christ, who abjured violence altogether and who taught the discipline of self-denial in order to make room for others, and insisted that we should love others as we love ourselves. Just as we don't want to be blotted out, we don't try to blot out other people's religion. In the name of Jesus Christ, this project was being promoted, and it created a lot of excitement. So the spirit of intolerance, which also carries a whole world of hypocrisy. I don't want to go into details for want of time. So take corruption, take intolerance, take the use of violence, take bloodshed, take the massive hypocrisy of actually serving mammon and invoking the name of God merely to legitimize the most dishonest service of mammon. And Jesus was acutely aware of this, and therefore he said, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. That teaching was unnecessary if people were not actually serving mammon under the guise of serving God. This is a core hypocrisy in religion, that people publicly state, this particularly the priestly class, state that they are serving God, but they are with their heart serving only mammon. Now, you want me to give you the counterpart in religion, counterpart in politics? It is patriotism. Patriotism is a quasi-religion. I can assure you that there will be no patriotism unless money is involved. That is why in our country, a lot of patriotism coexists with corruption. The fact that we are patriots does not mean that the roads that we construct in the height of our patriotism will not be safe from corruption, and that they will not begin to crack up within one month of their inauguration. For all our patriotic fervor, even the parliament building that we construct will leak. Whereas the parliament constructed by the British years ago still stands strong against all kinds of vagaries of the weather. Well, even the temple of Ayodhya. So our patriotism, our religious fervor, all these things collapse. They bend their knees before the might of mammon. This is a fact. But this will never be stated in public. Everything else will be stated, and that's the heart of hypocrisy. So my theory is that religion is the breeding ground, it is the nursery, it is a school of hypocrisy, and it's from there that it spreads to politics. And that's the reason also why from the beginning of politics and from the beginning of religion, there has been an unholy alliance between religion and politics. The priestly class has always stood in solidarity with the ruling classes and the economically, politically powerful people. Now, the third thing, or maybe to illustrate this a little more, the fact that religion is the source of this hypocrisy. Why did Jesus cleanse the temple of Jerusalem? He was actually highlighting this hypocrisy. According to the Jews, the temple was incomplete without the marketplace. The marketplace is the temple of Mammon. And unless and until the marketplace flourished, there could not be a temple. So the real temple was the marketplace. And what has happened over a long period of time is that hypocrisy is now rejected. And the real temple for the modern man is the market. That's why free market is such an emotive issue. The ultimate temple for the modern man is the market. Anyway, much remains to be said on it, but I can only afford to give a few hints here and there. Whereas if you look at Jesus as compared to the attitude of the priestly class of the times, Jesus was focused on life, whereas the priestly class was focused on their priestcraft. Now, craft, whether it is religious craft, whether it is handicraft, whether it is industrial craft, or whether it is the craftiness of politicians, wherever craft is involved, money is definitely involved. And craft belongs to the domain of imitation. Imitation definitely includes a distance from the original. So truth as against what is imitated, what is produced. For example, we define democracy glibly as government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, do you really think it can be? Can such a democracy ever exist? Has it ever existed? I'm afraid not. Not even in Athens. So we say, oh, no, it is the representative democracy. Now you tell me, what does representative democracy mean? In a country of 140 people, there are nearly 100 crore voters, 95 crore voters. I'm one among 95 crore voters. What's the value of my vote as far as power sharing is concerned? 1 out of 95 crores. You can imagine, I am less than a microscopic spot somewhere way outside beyond the backyard. I don't matter. You don't matter. It's a myth that it's, power of the people. The power of the people is only in terms of the masses, the numbers that are created artificially for the time being. The ad hoc masses created electorally in order to choose representatives who will then exercise all the power. But once you empower them to be your representatives, they cease to be your representatives and you become total strangers to them from the next day onwards. Then 5 years later, when they want votes from you, they'll come back to you. But other than that, you have nothing to do with how things are decided in this country. You have nothing to do with what legislations take place, so on and so forth. So it's a very beautiful, very sweet, enjoyable piece of fiction that, you are the sovereign power. You're the most powerless character ever. Okay? So all these are the necessary items of hypocritical assumptions necessary to keep a big show going. Of course, I do agree that there is no alternative to it. Well, the alternative to it is emphasizing forms of local government, but then to what extent local self-government is allowed to function is also decided not by the local people but from a distance from Delhi. So therefore, even in that respect, we don't have much of a choice. Now, therefore, so far we have seen that there is hypocrisy in politics, and hypocrisy cannot be separated from the practice of politics. And secondly, we try to understand what hypocrisy means, its operating principle, namely the contradiction between what is said and what is done, which is common to politics and religion alike. That's why Jesus said, do as the Pharisees tell you, but don't do as they do. That is typical hypocrisy on the part of the Pharisees, which Jesus understood so beautifully and so clearly. The third thing is, I said that the source of this hypocrisy is not politics, but it is religion. Religion is the breeding ground of hypocrisy, and I've only briefly, very, very briefly, in a hurried manner, examined it. Now, let's look at politics and hypocrisy again. Already time is a problem. Let's proceed as fast as we can. For example, all of us know that politics is a domain of power. And I tell you, wherever there is power, hypocrisy is inevitable. Let's go back a few centuries in time. Look at monarchy. Perhaps the form of government which did not have much need for hypocrisy, but even there, in order to legitimize power, you have to be hypocritical. Consider the doctrine of the divine right of kings. The idea that kings were divinely ordained to rule, therefore, they are ruling over the people under divine sanction as deputies of God. Now, in democracy, people rule you as your deputies or your representatives. But in kingship, one man rules over his subjects as the representative of God. Why God should choose him and not somebody else, we do not know. But people had no right to ask such questions. If they asked such questions, they would lose their heads. So nobody asked, everybody accepted it, endorsed it. Aha, wonderful, wonderful. God has elected you, appointed you to rule over us. Thank you. The king is dead, long live the king. Okay, that's a hypocrisy of it. So uh, politics functions on certain arbitrarily asserted principles. As I've already given an indication of that in democracy, the idea that citizens constitute the sovereign authority. On paper, yes, but not on ground, where something else, brutally different, rules the roost. Now, for example, take the recent budget. The finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, presented the budget. She paid encomiums to the prime minister. But if there's an element of truth in all this, the finance minister should have said that she has been able to do what she has, and she is proposing whatever she is proposing on the basis of the common man in this country, because the taxes are paid not by the prime minister, not by the cabinet ministers, not by the members of parliament. The taxes are paid by the people of India, majority of whom are poor. Even a beggar is paying tax. That's called indirect tax. When you buy a loaf of bread or a kilogram of rice, if you have the money to do so, or half a kilogram of tomato, you're paying tax. And the central government is laying out the budget based on the taxes contributed by every citizen of this country. But no one will be acknowledged, and only one person will be acknowledged. And all this is presented as the charity or the philanthropy of one person. So 140 crore people being beneficiaries of the munificence and the large-heartedness of an individual. Now, if this is not hypocrisy, what is? So the second issue, I said, wherever power is at work, there is hypocrisy. The second issue is there is hypocrisy about who exercises power. I've already given an illustration of it. It's not the people who exercise power. Power may be derived from the people, or authority, as Hannah Arendt says. It's not power, it is authority. The right word to use is not power. Power comes from instruments of violence like a gun or sword or atom bomb. What is derived from the people is not power, it is authority. And she argues that a political party or a governmental formation has legitimate authority only to the extent that it remains in tune with the will and wish of the people. But then the will and wish of the people can be manipulated grossly through the power of the media, through propaganda, through a whole range of techniques and strategies. We know, therefore, there are serious problems there. So, hypocrisy arises from the fact that politics is a theater of power, not of authority. Number two, it arises from the fact that this power, not authority, power is exercised by a tiny handful of people, presumably on behalf of the people, but then so many of them, in fact, a majority of the people are always victims of the exercise of power in one way or another, direct or indirect, overt or covert. Number three, every center of power will only act according to its own self-interest. You cannot have on the face of this earth a center of power which is self-effacing. The capacity to efface oneself, the capacity to transcend entrenched self-interest is not native to the exercise of power at all. In fact, power is power only because it gives you the license to pursue your vested interest brutally. So, on the one hand, in theory, the interests of the people are supreme. On the other hand, in real practice, the self-interest of the ruling elite will be pushed uncompromisingly, brutally, camouflaged to the extent possible, but if that's not possible, then in a sort of naked aggression using the state power to muscle opposition and resentment. Then politics and national wealth. It's people's wealth, right? But how come it is concentrating in the hands of a few, in spite of the fact that directive principles of state policy very clearly state that the wealth of a nation should not be allowed to, uh, to be accumulated in the hands of a few. I think it's Article 38, 39, I think, of the Indian Constitution. Who owns the wealth of this country? Who has the support? Who enjoys the support of the government? We know, for example, that farmers are committing suicide in their thousands. But that's not anybody's concern. But if a wicked police officer plants some kind of dubious explosive device a kilometer or 2 kilometers away from the house of a major industrialist in this country, then that will create a tsunami of anxiety and reprisal on the part of the state. It should be done. I'm not saying the security must be a compromise for anyone, but I'm only saying that the life of all citizens must be considered as of equal worth. Otherwise, what is equality? If different price tags are attached to the lives of different categories of people, where does equality go? So all these are, now look at the 4 fundamental values stated in the preamble to the Constitution: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. Wherever there are ideals, wherever ideals are posited, within a context of power brokering, and power being only exercised, and it can only be exercised by a handful of people who can never transcend their vested interests and the alliance that they would therefore create in order to protect and perpetuate their vested interests, hypocrisy is inevitable. But I would say, strictly on theoretical terms, that this hypocrisy is not the worst. The worst possible thing is the truth that, for example, a military dictatorship can come out with and say, a military general who has captured the power of the country and rules as a supreme, uncrowned king, the absolute authority of a country, can say, well, I have nothing to do with hypocrisy. Under my regime, the wealth of this nation belongs to a handful of people, and I'm not apologetic about it. People's power, stuff and nonsense, forget about it. I am the power. As Louis XIV said, I am the state, right? Is that better than a center of political power saying, no, Janada Janardhan, people are gods, and I submit and I pay obeisance to the Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. The Constitution is my religion. Which is better? Well, no easy answers, I know. But sometimes I feel that the kind of brutal statement of naked truths is a greater offense than this kind of hypocrisy in which at least wickedness pays tribute to what is good and righteous. Dishonesty pays tribute to honesty. So we can't have ideal solutions in this fallen world of ours. Therefore, we may be forced to rest satisfied with the second best. Therefore, I say, let me have this politics of hypocrisy and not the politics of brutal truth, in which even the modicum of theoretical commitment we have to fundamental values like truth, justice, love, compassion, caring, etc. is blotted out, and their opposites are enthroned as the norms for all to follow. Such a situation for me is unthinkable. So submit these somewhat convoluted, disjointed thoughts to your consideration, and I look forward to your responses. Thank you.